If you're having a hard time trying to figure out what type of foundation to install on your project for your addition, maybe you're building a new house, well, I'm going to run through some of the pros and cons and different types of foundations that you can install out there. Now, granted, wherever you live, there might be one that's kind of more prevalent that people use more than others. It could be based on water table. It could be based on weather conditions. So at a minimum, you might even, if you're not kind of just privy to the construction world, you might drive around to some of the new construction sites and just kind of look and see what they do in general. But I'll kind of run through the basics, give you some tips, some pros and cons on it, and then help you hopefully make a decision on whichever route you're going to go. So there's kind of 3, and you could argue maybe 4 basic foundation types. There's the slab on grade, there is the crawl space, there's the basement, and then you could say a monopore. Monopore essentially, I guess, would become a slab on grade, but it is another method to installing a foundation. And so I got some pictures I'm going to run through, and I'll just kind of give you some of the pros and cons that I know of as an inspector, as a previous builder, on what we did in our area, and maybe that'll help you make your decision and keep you moving on your project. So right here I've got a couple pictures, and we're going to start off with slab on grade. So slab on grade is kind of what it says, slab on grade. So you're going to pour your foundation, your footings, your foundation wall, your stem wall, and then you're going to pour a slab between it. And you'll do all of your plumbing groundwork. You'll do any underground electrical conduits. Any of that stuff is going to go in before you pour that slab. And then kind of once that slab's poured, I mean, you can go jackhammer out concrete and move stuff here and there, but it's pretty well set. Slab on grades are great for like hydronic heating. So if you're going to do any type of like a boiler system where you're kind of heating the slab for your heat, that is awesome. Slab on grade is perfect for that. It's also going to provide you with something that doesn't have a lot of bounce to it. So if you've got, you don't really like floor systems because they move and they bounce too much, slab on grade is perfect for that. And depending on cost, you know, sometimes concrete is a little cheaper than a floor system is, depending on wood costs or concrete costs in your area. And so you could probably waffle between maybe a crawl space or a slab on grade back and forth, and you know, make your decision from there. The big key with slab on grade though is just kind of once that slab is poured, it's going to be harder to get back in and move things around. You also get into heating and cooling. You know, I'm not a HVAC duct installer by trade, so don't quote me on this, but typically when we're building houses, the ideal situation would be to separate your supply and your return. Your supply would come from underground, so in the floor system, you know, would be where the grill is, and then your return would be up in the ceiling. Well, you can't do that in a slab on grade because you can't get your duct underground, so it's all going to go up in the attic. That is totally fine. Not the end of the world. I've built a ton of houses slab on grade, but if you are someone that is really wants your heating system to be as most efficient as possible, check with your HVAC guy, and they might lean you one way or the other, which could be towards a crawl space instead of a slab on grade. So there's kind of a few takes on slab on grade. Some of the things to think about if you decide to go down that road. You could also possibly have issues with frost issues if you're in a really, really cold state with a slab on grade. Now, obviously, your footings are going to want to go down below your frost line, but just dealing with concrete in general and freezing, you know, crawl space might be a little bit better road to go down. But again, you know, cruise around, see what everyone's doing in your area, and maybe even ask a builder what they recommend for their preference where you live, and it might help you make your decision. So let's talk a little bit about basements. I'm going to do crawl spaces kind of at the end because there's a couple different avenues you can go down with that. And honestly, if I was building a house, which the last house that I built for us, we did a crawl space, and I just kind of prefer them. So I'll kind of go through that one at the end. Because basements are a great way to go too if you want bang for your buck, right? If you've got a piece of property, your house or whatever, and you know you don't really have, your water table's not too bad, you're not dealing with flooding issues or anything like that, and you can get away with a basement. Well, you already got forms there, you already got rebar, you already got people on site, or you're doing it yourself. I mean, you just got to maybe rent some more forms, buy a little bit more rebar, and then you get that square footage at the fraction of a cost to having to, buy the lumber, frame the walls, add another floor system, so on and so forth, to go another level higher when you could kind of get the square footage down below. Now, with a basement though, you're going to be pouring a slab. So you do have that added cost of, you're going to have to pour that slab, plus the added cost in the foundation wall. It does add up. I'm not going to deny that it does cost extra, but in the grand scheme of things, especially if you are subcontracting some of it out, it's probably cheaper than going another floor higher. You don't have the siding to worry about that you would have if it's above grade. So there's all kinds of other different components that might save you a little bit of money down that road. But basements are great if you've got the soils to handle it and you don't have moisture issues. Take advantage of it. Put the basement in. If nothing else, you can leave it unfinished and you have a spot for storage. Because nowadays it seems like we can all use some extra space for storage. So what I've done here is I've kind of moved some of these pictures around. I just have another one to show you. This one right here I showed you in the last set on slab on grade. You can see right here they've gone in, they've insulated for that slab, but then as they come through here, now this turns into, it's a daylight basement. So this now becomes a basement wall right here, and then they will frame on top of that to finish off the basement level. And so this would be a basement wall right here, and so they'd end up having to go in and insulate this wall before final. So you got to have it at least insulated. How you do that would kind of depend on the area that you live in. We used to allow stick pin, where you just go in here and you would essentially glue the insulation to the wall. I know in some areas maybe that's not allowed. Maybe they want a gap between the insulation and the foundation wall. But they've gone in the code book and they've amended the requirement for a vapor barrier. Now, it still may be required where you're at, but the code book itself has deleted the requirement for the vapor barrier. And so because of that, in our area, most people now, they frame a wall and they just insulate the wall. And that's how it's left until you get into finishes. If you decide to finish it, then obviously you take it a little bit farther. But for a basement, that's kind of how it's left in an unfinished state. Here we've got a big basement right here, and this is probably a 9-foot wall. If you kind of count between these are like 2 foot, 1 foot, 2 foot. I think it's 9 feet when I was out there doing inspections, which was a pretty big basement wall. And they've gone in and waterproofed this thing. And so that's another component when it comes to basements, is you got to make sure to waterproof it. You got to make sure it's protected from any moisture. If you get moisture seeping through that thing, it's going to be a bad deal down the road. And so that's probably like the big one, right? You got to have an egress window. Make sure you got at least one egress window, and you probably want to plan for more than that if you're going to finish it out and have bedrooms and so on and so forth. But a basement is a great way to go if you want to get bang for your buck on square footage. So think about that. If you've got the space to do it and the funds, it's good to have, and you can obviously just finish it down the road. You don't have to finish it now. It can be a project in the waiting, and you have it ready to go. Crawl spaces are probably my most favorite, and if I had to recommend one, if I wasn't doing a basement, I would probably do a crawl space. And the reason I would do it is for access. I like to be able to get in that crawl space if I need to run a cable wire. I think everything's wireless now these days, but if I needed to run a wire or electrical wire, or I wanted to do something down the road, I always have access to it. Now, a basement, you're going to have access to everything if you've got a basement as well. But if a basement's not in the cards, then a crawl space is, by all means, a great way to go. The other thing I like about them is the floor is warmer. It's wood, right? And the last house we built it on a crawl space, and we had a ton of tile that we put in. And I didn't want the cold concrete plus the tile. You'd be walking around on that in your bare feet, and it'd just be cold. So we went with with a crawl space. We couldn't necessarily afford radiant floor heat or hydronic heating, and so we used a standard furnace, central air system, and to kind of beat the cold, crawl space worked perfect. I also was able to get in there and run all kinds of different wires and things that I needed to do during construction and after construction to kind of get the house put up the way that we wanted it to. So it's just great to have access to that. But there's two different types that you can get into. One is a conditioned crawl space, and one is a vented crawl space. So unconditioned crawl space, if that makes sense. Our area, we don't really allow conditioned crawl spaces just due to water table and moisture issues. We don't like to trap any moisture down there because a conditioned crawl space is just that, it's conditioned. And usually there's some additional costs that roll into that may not be worth the money, especially for a DIY type project. Because you're obviously going to heat the space, right? You're going to have some type of heating component to keep it conditioned, but then you also have to vent it. So then you're going to have some type of fan that's running continuously down there to get any moisture out of it. And I, on my end of things, it just seems like things to go wrong and things to deal with. And but you hop over to like a vented crawl space, and it's just open to the elements. You put vents in around the outside of it. You open and close the vents in the summer or the winter time, and you just let everything that's in there just find its way out. So if you get any moisture buildup in there, it should just find its way out. You insulate the floor system instead of the walls, right? Conditioned crawl space, it's conditioned, so you can insulate the walls. And you may, for added energy savings, you might end up insulating the floor as well. I mean, that depends on your area and what your building department wants, but that is one of the differences, pros and cons to it. So a vented crawl space, you're just going to go in and you're going to put vents around it, and I'm going to show you a picture here, a couple of them. So here we have a foundation wall all set up, and they've gone in and they've set these vents, and you can see them here down the picture. And those vents they've got flaps on them, and you just open or close them, like I said, in the winter or the springtime. And that just allows for natural air movement to pass through that vented crawl space and make sure that you don't get any buildup of moisture in there or any stagnant air or any mold buildup or that kind of stuff. So just simpler, right? It just makes life easier. So the only other thing that I didn't talk about would be like a monopore, which is essentially a slab on grade. But a monopore is a process by which you pour the footing, the stem wall, or the footing, the stem wall, and the slab all at once. So once you pour that slab, you have a slab on grade. That could get a little tricky if you do a monopore with the slab and you've got a bunch of plumbing and so on and so forth that's in there, because you're going to have to figure out and make sure that your foundation is square, do your rough in on your plumbing, and know that it's going to be correct, and then pour it all at once. I did an inspection on a Panda Express in our area, and they did just that. They had the plumbers come in before they even dug anything, and they did it all off of like GPS and some electronics to figure out exactly where all of the plumbing and the electrical conduits came up through the floor. And then they went in and dug it, and they poured it all at once. It was pretty intense, but it worked out. A DIYer might not want to go down that road, so you might stick to just monopores on like unconditioned garages and stuff like that. So this has been with Building Code Tips. I thought I'd throw this video in there as part of the foundation series, just to, if you're out there and you're kind of working your way through this and you can watch some of these videos, but you're still like, I don't know which direction to go on my foundation. Maybe this will give you a few tips and ideas on that. You can visit buildingcodetips.com. I'm going to put a link down in the comments and in the description. I've got a free kind of before you get started checklist that I got on there, and it's just for you DIYers getting started. And you're kind of thinking about like, well, where do I start? What questions should I ask? Is there anything I should think about kind of in the back of my brain as I'm getting started on this? And hopefully those will kind of kind of kickstart the brain and maybe even give you questions to ask your building department or this or that. So it's in there. It's free. Go get it, and hopefully it helps you out. Definitely hit the comments below, though, if you've got questions, and I will do my best to help you out.